welcome to this Innovation Forum and OFI webinar. My name is Toby Webb. I'm the founder of Innovation Forum. Delighted that so many of you are joining us currently and are still doing so for this next 90 minutes, where we're going to talk about choices for change and what that means in terms of a business strategy for OFI. You can see who's joining me here on the screen, but before I briefly introduce them, for those of you unaware of OFI, they grow, they source, they process cocoa, coffee, dairy, nuts and spices around the world for food ingredients for supermarkets and homes. So a significant player in the agricultural arena, I think it's fair to say. And we're looking forward to spending the next 90 minutes with you discussing what that means going forward. And we're going to have some opportunity for Q&A here. I would urge you, though, perhaps out of basic politeness, to listen to some of the things the speakers say before you add your questions. That is the general rule. So you can use the Q&A function. You can vote for other questions. I will be turning over to the speakers for some Q&A in about an hour or so for about 20 minutes. I will only be putting relevant questions to the speakers, though. So if you've got a particular bee in your bonnet about something, you feel free to write tiny text in a little box to your heart's content. But I will only be using relevant questions to put to the speakers. And if you can make it a question rather than a statement, we don't have time for Hugo Chavez style soliloquies in text format. So please do keep your questions short and sharp. And if I could ask you one more thing about your questions, which is don't do all the great questions in the last 5 minutes, because that's what always happens. And then we either have to speak really quickly or we can't get to them all. So a bit of pressure on you there, audience. Come up with your questions in due course and try and put them in there in time so that we can address them. So we're all working together on this and really looking forward to hearing from our colleagues at OFI and elsewhere over the next 90 minutes or so. This is being recorded and it will go out in both audio and video format. So if you, for some bizarre reason, are not a subscriber to the Innovation Forum podcast, I can't quite believe that you wouldn't be, but imagine for a moment that you're not. You can find us on any podcast platform, any good one anyway, by searching for Innovation Forum. We get lots and lots of listens and downloads afterwards. We'll also put this on our YouTube channel, where we have a brilliant documentary about regenerative cotton, as well as this, which will go up there very soon. So looking forward to the next 90 minutes or so. Joining me is Roel van Poppel, who is Chief Sustainability Officer at OFI, Christopher Stewart, Global Head of Sustainability Impact at OFI, Alistair Child, Chief Sustainability Officer from Mars Wrigley, Stephanie Daniels, Senior Program Director at the Sustainable Food Lab, Jeff Cohen, the Mission Director for Indonesia for USAID, and Burcu Turkey, Global Head of Sustainability for Nuts for OFI. So get your nut questions in and Burcu will be there to answer them. So really looking forward to this. We're going now to hear from Roel and Christopher and Burcu to start with, to run through with you what Choices for Change actually means for OFI. They're going to talk about their strategy and their targets for 20 minutes or so, but it won't be death by PowerPoint. It's going to be interesting. So get your questions ready after that and throughout the webinar, and I shall turn over to Roel now to kick us off. So Roel, welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Toby. We're really humbled to be able to present our strategy to this very diverse audience. And we're doing this way because we want to reinforce that, one, transparency, and two, collaboration is really essential to drive impact at scale across the supply chains that we're operating in. Choices for Change is the next phase in our sustainability journey, but we're not starting from scratch. We've been working towards 2030 targets for the last couple of months and years to address the specific challenges and opportunities relating to our individual supply chains. And many of you on this call will know us through this work and the multi-stakeholder programs we run under our product-specific strategies like Cocoa Compass, Coffee Lens, the Nut Trails and Dairy Tracks. And it's this experience and history of partnerships that has set us up to create an overarching strategy and 2030 targets for OFI's global business. Let's dive in. So why don't we go to the next slide? First of all, before we start, next slide, please. Before we start, for those of you who aren't customers or partners of OFI, here's a snapshot of who we are. We are a global operating business, as Toby mentioned, in cocoa, coffee, nuts, spices, and dairy. We source from millions of farmers. We had a revenue of $11.6 billion last year, and we operate in many different countries with a good group of manufacturing sites. I think what is key to note here is that it's not only that we're sourcing from farmers, we're also collaborating with farmers and providing support. So yeah, the global presence, the skill is very relevant for OFI. And we are proud actually also of being involved throughout the whole supply chain. Let's go to the next slide. So we as a OFI, we partner at every step to create real change from plant to pallet, whether that's sourcing from origins and sourcing from farmers directly. We are in many cases the farmer ourselves as well. We are processing in origin wherever possible, as well as in end markets. We are also making sure that we collaborate to create impact across those supply chains. We're trying to innovate not only in the way we develop our products for our customers and our food and beverage solutions, but also in the way we, for instance, grow crops together with the farmers that we collaborate with. We are very proud of the way we manufacture our products, and at the end of the day, we want to deliver good food choices to our customers. Let's go to the next slide. As a company, we are committed to drive positive change ourselves to enable long-term security of supply. But we see increased scrutiny from regulators as well as increased consumer expectations, to which our customers are making stronger commitments, and they're asking for help. They're asking for help to manage this challenging landscape and meet those sustainability commitments. They need to mitigate the risk in their supply chains. They need to deliver against their own brand objectives. They're driving consumer loyalty through the way they position themselves, and they want to be also more and more involved in driving that impact. And some examples you can see on the slide here, where several very relevant companies are making very strong statements and pledges about what they want to achieve and are willing to invest in it as well. Let's go to the next slide. So let's start with our purpose. The purpose of OFI is to be the change for good food and a healthy future. And that is basically the bigger why we are in business. If we move to the next slide, we link this actually to our sustainability vision. Our sustainability vision is to be the preferred partner for positive change. So the be the change element of our purpose comes back in this. But what we would like to become, and we realize we cannot do this on our own, we would like to become at a given point in the future to be that preferred partner for positive change. And every word is loaded in this slide. Partner means that we want to collaborate long term with our stakeholders, whether you are a customer, whether you are a farmer or a farmer group, whether you are an NGO, whether you are governments, we want to be there with you. And if you have a choice, we want to be that preferred partner to really drive that impact. And obviously, in sustainability, we want to drive positive impact. And that's why we're saying we want to be the preferred partner for positive change. Our long-term ambitions are focused on 4 material impact areas. And on the left side, we're starting with the farmers and farmer prosperity, livelihood for farmers. That is our long-term ambition, to help farmers and also workers in our supply chains to prosper. Also, we want to safeguard human and children's rights in communities that thrive. From a climate point of view, we are committing to be net zero with our greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. And we want to regenerate the living world in the farming landscapes that we're operating in. So we have some long-term ambitions. We have a vision of what we want to become from a sustainability point of view that's linked clearly to the purpose, which is the bigger why we are in business. And if we move to the next slide, we think it's also very important to highlight what is needed actually to be able to deliver that. And we feel on one hand that it's important to really know what you're talking about and to really also have the people that deliver that. So we would like to be sustainability experts. We have over 500 people embedded through our businesses in the origins that we're operating in, that work together with our customers and work together with our farmers specifically to drive that impact and know and understand the risks that exist in the supply chains. But they are there at the beginning, so we're also embedded throughout those farming communities, and being a specialist on one hand and also being embedded in the other hand allows us the opportunity to basically offer customers and partners not only traceability, understanding where the products come from, but also investing in that capability and creating the insights to drive that positive change. And in this respect, we've also added the word choices, because depending on where you are and where your supply chain originates from and how it runs through your final market, it's very important to understand what the key risks are and the key issues that you want to assess and to address from a sustainability point of view. And that's why we're saying we want to make deliberate choices to drive that positive change, which is a nice bridge to the next slide, talking about the title of our strategy. And the title of our strategy is basically Choices for Change. These are the deliberate choices that we are making for change that we want to bring about in the supply chains that we are operating in together with our outside stakeholders. And we want to generate a change in 4 impact areas, which you've seen on that previous slide with our long-term ambitions. On the left side, you see the social and economic areas with prosperous farmers and thriving communities. And on the right side, you see the environmental areas with climate action and regenerating the living world. But we can only create impact in those 4 impact areas if we are building that upon a foundation of supply chain excellence, understanding where products come from, engaging with your farmer suppliers and being with them, understanding the risks and how to mitigate those, getting the data and therefore the insights to really understand how you best can create that impact, and also being able to verify that data as well. Those are all elements of the supply chain excellence that we see as a critical foundation to drive that impact at scale in those 4 material areas that we have mentioned on this slide. Now, you've now seen our purpose, the bigger why we are in business. You've seen our sustainability vision, to be that preferred partner for positive change. And again, we're stating very clearly, we are just an actor in this. We need to collaborate with many others. You've seen the name of our strategy and our sustainability value proposition. Let's now get into what it means for us and what our targets are for 2030. Next slide, please. So along the same lines as you've seen in the previous slide, you can see our targets laid out in similar colors. And we have decided to focus on 9 key, largely numerical targets. And they can only be delivered, again, building upon that foundation of supply chain excellence that I talked about. I will read out the 9 targets because these are basically the aligned targets that we have come up with the organization that we will basically work towards to achieve in 2030. So on the prosperous farmer side, we would like 1 million OFI farmers receiving enhanced livelihood support and 200,000 of those earning a living income. That is roughly, the 1 million farmers is roughly 40% of the overall group of farmers that we're dealing with. From a thriving communities point of view, we are committed to make sure that 100% of the identified human rights and child labor cases receive remediation actions. And we will be supporting 750,000 households with enhanced nutrition or health support. From a climate point of view, we're stating that our scope 1 and 2 emissions would have reduced by 50% versus a baseline year of 2020. And from a scope 3 point of view, we're looking at a 30% reduction versus a baseline year of 2020. So for those who don't know, scope 1 and 2 emissions are the emissions that you emit yourself through your operations or the energy that you utilize. Scope 3 are the emissions that happen before you touch the product or after you deliver the product. And that is the vast majority of our emissions, and that is also the hardest to influence. More about that later. From a regenerating the living world point of view, we would like 2 million hectares under regenerative ag practices by 2030, which is close to half of our total sourcing hectarage. We want to become forest positive across our business, which is bigger than just deforestation free, which is already hard, but it also implies we're looking at agroforestry practices, we're looking at conservation practices to really become that forest positive supplier. And last but not least, we want to be involved and lead in 20 living landscapes partnerships to regenerate nature. Again, re-articulating that we realize that we cannot create impact just by ourselves. We need to collaborate. with our farmers, with customers, with other stakeholders, with NGOs, with governments, with local authorities, to actually bring that positive impact that we jointly need to realize, to make sure that our supply chains are going to exist for a very long time ahead. So these are our very clear 2030 targets that we are here with are committing ourselves to. Let's move to the next slide. You have seen, as I mentioned before, our individual product strategies that have been published before, Cocoa Compass and Coffee Lens. I would like to re-articulate that these dedicated sustainability strategies, with their own very specific targets related to the products, are here to stay. They will continue to be developed. They will continue to be delivered upon. But altogether, they are forming our choices for change overall sustainability strategy. So therefore, our product strategies, that's the key message here, they're really integral to our overall ambitious targets of OFI. Let's move to the next slide. We deliver the data, the insights, the systematic approach to our customers through our sustainability management system at source. And why don't I now hand over to you, Christopher, to dive a little bit deeper in how we make creating impact real with our customers, but also throughout our whole supply chains. Over to you, Christopher.
Thanks very much, Roel. And in the next few minutes, Burcu and myself are going to take you on a deep dive into a couple of those pillars. We can't cover everything, but we'll hear from our partners as well, who will tell you more. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our climate action plan. Climate is obviously one of the highest priorities in terms of sustainability, and all of you on this call know exactly why. And it's incredibly important for agriculture, and it's incredibly relevant to smallholders who are buffeted by climate change, as well as the vagaries of the market. So we have a major challenge within OFI in that well over 95% of our overall greenhouse gas footprint is scope 3, i.e. it's coming from the products that come from our suppliers. And as you heard, our suppliers include today about 2.4 million smallholder farmers. So really, in order to reach those targets that Roel just told you about, we're going to have to work with a significant number of smallholder farmers effectively to drive down greenhouse gases on farm in complex supply chains. So how are we going to do this? How do we really make it real? Well, for a number of years now, we've been collecting granular data on the sources of greenhouse gas emissions within farms and farming supply chains. And that's really getting down to not just things like farm size and yield, but also what do the farmers do on the farm? What kind of fertilizers? How much do they use? How do they use energy and irrigation on their farm? How do they manage residues, as well as transport emissions and these sort of things? So all of this data, primary data, can go into at source and our carbon calculator, our greenhouse gas calculator, and then we can use what you can see on the left hand of this slide, which is our climate scenario planner, which is also built on top of that source. So really, what we're doing there is using the primary data and tweaking, for instance, what kind of fertilizer. What's the impact of increasing yield or changing fertilizer or managing residues on on those emissions, and we can look at the most cost-effective and efficient way of driving down emissions on farm. But we can't really do this without actually understanding the practices that farmers typically use and embedding climate smart agriculture within our programs. So we've also been working completely hand in hand with the at-source data system, using that data to create low carbon handbooks for our crops. So with the carbon coffee handbook that you can see here, we're about to finish the cocoa handbook, and this contains not just the climate related practices, but other forms of regenerative agriculture. So looking at the farm as a whole, but with a real focus on what's going to move the needle for farmers, and looking across all practices from pest management through to fertilizer use. And then finally, we need to embed these practices within programs, and this is actually obviously a huge logistical challenge, which requires training and capacity building in the field with a real army of outreach and extension officers effectively working with the programs, working with our partners and our customers very frequently in programs that reach the farmers themselves and show them that actually implementing climate smart agriculture can be positive for their livelihoods as well. All of this only works if the farmers are happy and they adopt better practices. And I'm going to hand over to Burcu in a second, really, to talk about our approach as a whole, because we don't look at climate alone. We look at the farmers and farming communities, and particularly some aspects Burcu is going to talk about in terms of human rights and supporting women within farming systems. So without further ado, Burcu, do you want to take over?
Yes, thank you so much, Christopher. So safeguarding children, we can go to the next slide, please. Safeguarding children's and human rights is, as you said, Christopher, is one of the critical pillars of Choices for Change. We work together with small farm holders in our supply chain. And while we're working with small farm holders, we have seen that women and children are key actors in farming. So if you want to create real impact on the ground, we need to understand the roles that women play. Women are equally working on the farm. Women are equally taking care of the crop. So that is why empowering women in agriculture is immensely important. I say women in agriculture because women do not play an important role only as farmers. For example, if we take the hazelnut supply chain case in Turkey, more than half of the seasonal migrant workers who are coming to the hazelnut harvest are women. So our delicious hazelnuts come from Turkey. Turkey is where I'm also based, and the world's 60 to 70% hazelnuts are grown in Turkey. But the crop is very delicate. It needs to be harvested in a very short time. So small farm holders actually don't have enough time to harvest it by themselves. So they need support from seasonal migrant workers. Seasonal migrant workers are living in Turkey, who are living in the southeast region of Turkey, and they're moving from one crop to another for 9 months of the year, together with their families. And when I say families, families with 7 to 10 children, so big families, and they find an empty place, an empty space, and sometimes on the roadsides when they want to work in a farm in that province. So they set up their tents, and these areas, they don't have access to water, they don't have access to electricity, children don't have access to school, and health and hygiene is a big problem in these areas. For this, in Turkey, we have set up a program called Women on the Roads for Hazelnut, where our social workers and our sustainability team on the ground work together with women seasonal migrant workers. So our teams are training women on health and nutrition, hygiene, supporting women so that they have access to better working and living conditions in Turkey. In parallel, because I said, they're coming in big families, so families with a lot of children increases the risk of child labor in the hazelnut supply chain. So how we tackle this is we have our child labor monitoring and remediation system. So you see the cycle on the screen, and CLMRS, Child Labor Monitoring and Remediation System cycle, starts with training, and it continues with profiling, sensitization, and if there is a case, we remediate, take remediation actions. In Turkey, in hazelnut supply chain, our remediation action is opening up summer schools during the harvest so that the children of the seasonal migrant workers don't go to the farm with their families, but they go to school instead. So I would like to share an anecdote, which is really important for me. When I visited one of the summer schools in the Black Sea region, which is the north of the country, and it's in a city called Ordu. So I visit on the farm, and then I go to the summer school, and children were there. It was a break time. Some children were playing football, some playing hide and seek, and I had the chance to talk to some of the children. It is when I met a girl who was 7 years old. Her name was Aisha. So she was very shy. I was, asking her questions, but she was, giving me short answers. And I asked her if she liked coming to the summer school. She nodded her head, and I asked her, why do you like coming to the summer school? She said it was the first time in her life that she went to a school. So I was so surprised, but at the same time, I was so happy because thanks to the OFI sustainability program, we made an impact on her life. So summer schools are very critical in the hazelnut supply chain, but it's not the only remediation action that we do under child labor monitoring and remediation system. To date, our CLMRS covers 260,000 farmer households in supply chains of cocoa, cashews, coffee, and of course, hazelnuts in various origins. So safeguarding children's and human rights is an integral part of Choices for Change, so that girls like Aisha, for example, have the opportunity to go to school for the first time in their lives and hopefully continue their education. That is how we can create real impact in farming communities and make farming resilient. Back to you, Roel.
Oh, Roel, you're on.
How to beat this, Burcu? This is a very clear example, and let's move to the next slide. I'll try to close this off because I think it's important that we go to the panel and the fantastic members that are with us today. I just want to reiterate this slide that scaling up sustainability impact we cannot do on our own. It can only be done if we collaborate and if we openly collaborate with many different actors across the supply chains in specific programs, which we do in several programs globally, around 130 or slightly over 130 programs we have running. So we work with our customers and partners across the globe to make this happen at scale. And the slide here gives you just a flavor of some of those partnerships that we have around the world. And I think it's important to re-articulate that collaboration for us is absolutely essential, also for the delivery of our own sustainability targets for 2030 and beyond. We need to do this together, and that's why I'm happy that there's so many people today listening in, because we need many of the partners that are joining this call today to work on this together with us. Let me move to the last slide, please. So we hope to have given you a concrete overview of our 2030 targets, those clear 9 numerical targets, and how these link to our purpose of being the change for good food and a healthy future, and our vision of being the preferred partner for positive change. We're humbled because we're just one company in this space, and I'm very happy therefore and delighted to have such a wonderful panel today with us, that I will be gladly handing over to now to go deeper into some of the elements of our strategy, reinforcing again, and I've repeated myself a few times, that we can only bring meaningful change if we collaborate throughout the industry. So Toby, over to you for the panel.
Thank you so much, Roel. Really interesting interventions there. We're seeing some great questions as well in the Q&A, some of which you were addressed as you were talking. So well done, Team OFI, but much more to discuss in the Q&A when we get there. And if anybody can address any of the points in the meantime, they're very welcome to do so. Let's have a chat now with Stephanie Daniels from the Sustainable Food Lab. Many people on this call will be familiar with your work, Stephanie, over many years. So I'd love to hear your thoughts really on the kind of partnerships and collaborations that you've seen that are trying to deliver more on living income strategies. So Stephanie, welcome. I've got a few questions for you, but really keen to know, how do you collaborate and work with organizations like OFI and others? Stephanie, welcome.
Thank you, Toby, and thanks to the OFI team for the invitation to be here. So yes, I work with the Sustainable Food Lab. We're also one of the founding members of the Living Income Community of Practice. So that's an open global platform where we've been working with OFI and a number of other companies, governments, civil society, farmer organizations on this challenge of how do we collectively tap into the potential of agriculture and trade, particularly for those people who manage lands in emerging markets who may be dealing with lack of infrastructure, high levels of poverty, et cetera. So I think in the community of practice in particular, OFI's been very involved since the beginning, kind of bringing the key questions behind this challenge of how do we move farmers towards earning a living income and having sustainable livelihoods. So definitely applaud that for their engagement. And I would say, I think it is a unique responsibility of global trading programs. Those organizations, as we've heard today from Rural Christopher and others, of having boots on the ground, insights into the realities of different farmers, to bring that knowledge, both in terms of what's working, but also what's not working, what they need from partners to be effective and to move the needle on living income and livelihoods.
Thank you. When you look at choices for change, Stephanie, what are your views on its level of ambition? Do you want to see more there? I mean, there are some big numbers ahead for the OFI team.
Yeah, of course. I think all of us, including probably the OFI team, 100% everywhere. We want a fully integrated, holistic agriculture and trade system. But I think we all know this is these are huge challenges. And so when I look at, I'm primarily focused on their livelihood and living income goals. And first, I really applaud that there are clear livelihoods and income targets. I think we all know targets help to focus a company's staff. This is a large global company, a lot of different contexts you're working in. And so that's really important. I think it also signposts to peer companies, to clients, to competitors, to governments in the areas they work in, that farmer prosperity is really central and a priority. That's all really positive. I think when we look at incomes, farmer income, we want to also flag a danger that we've heard from many companies engaged in the community of practice, that having quantitative targets on 200,000 farmers earning a living income, that the company doesn't use that KPI as a way to concentrate your sourcing from larger scale and wealthier farmers. Of course, you have, the company has all different kinds of scale farmers in your different supply chains, but trade for poorer farmers or smallholder farmers is critical. And it is also fundamental for the other goals that the company wants to achieve, like regenerative agriculture and climate resilience. So I would encourage OFI to both continue to communicate about these goals and also ensure that you're using some of the aligned indicators that we've been working on collectively as a community, like looking at the earnings of the median farmer in a population, so that we're not picking the winners, but we're moving the needle for a whole population of farmers. Yeah, I have a lot more to say, but I want to be conscious of time.
Thanks. Well, we've got a few minutes. So let me ask you, Stephanie, pace of change. What's your sense of acceleration over the last, say, 5 years? About 4 years ago, Innovation Forum put together a report sponsored by a number of companies and NGOs looking at smallholder farming around the world. And one of the things we found is that there was lots of focus on the farmer, but less on the ecosystem around them that allowed them to be more efficient and gain a higher income. Lots left out of practice in the report that we published. What's your sense of change over the last 4 or 5 years? Are we accelerating in the way that we're thinking to plug some of these gaps?
Oh, that's a tough question, Toby. I think it's difficult to answer that definitively. There is no doubt that there is a higher recognition, I think both a more deep recognition and broad recognition of the need to focus on sustainable agriculture, that it is critical not only for feeding the world, but for managing the land, preserving forests, and our climate future. So I think that is undeniable, inclusion of agriculture in the COP negotiations, et cetera. I also think, well, from our experience in the living income community practice, that the leading companies in food and agriculture are thinking very seriously about these problems. So endemic poverty in some origins, the need to invest over the long term in building these relationships. So yes, I think that is extremely positive. Is it fast enough? I think we still are operating in the dynamics of the commodity market, which is essentially built to move commodities around the world in an efficient way. It's not really built for these social and environmental outcomes. So this is the challenge we all have, and OFI has, to be a profitable business, move commodities, but do it in a way that's building value over time. And that's obviously not only their challenge, it's a challenge for everyone.
Thanks very much, Stephanie. Excellent answer to a broad and complex question that I threw at you out of the blue. So excellent. Just trying to keep everybody on their toes. Lots more in the Q&A and lots more questions coming in. So we'll perhaps let Stephanie ruminate on some of that for now. Stephanie, thank you so much for your insights. Really interesting. Let's turn over to Alistair now. Alistair Child, thank you for joining us. I'm not even going to ask you how early it is, but audience, Alistair's got up extremely early to join us today. So thank you for doing that. Alistair, really keen to perhaps start off by hearing just a bit about yourself and your experience leading sustainability at Mars Wrigley. And then let's talk specifically about your partnership with OFI. And I'd love to hear what you think of what you've just heard as well about the Choices for Change programme. So lots to talk about. Alistair, welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Toby. Just by means of a quick intro, and greetings to everyone on the webinar. Alistair Child. I've been at Mars for 23 years. Mars is a business made up of our snacking Mars Wrigley division. We've got a pet care business and a food business, and I've led sustainability for that snacking business since we merged Chocolate and Wrigley back in 2017, which was also the year we made our Sustainable Intergeneration Plan commitments, our promises, so to speak. Been doing that for several years, 7 years now, and we've built some great momentum. I feel like we're starting to crack the code on how you actually deliver on those promises, turn them into performance, so to speak. I'm pretty proud that we're on our SBTI pathway, decoupled our emissions growth from our business growth, and are on that science-based pathway. Pretty proud of our environmental performances. My heart personally is in the social space, so linking to Stephanie there. In my spare time outside of Mars, I set up a foundation that put super bright, super needy kids through school in Malawi as well. So that's where my heart is, in the social space. And we do a lot of work there as Mars as well, with a number of supply chains where farmers are not where they need to be in terms of livelihoods. Known OFI for a long time. I think I was thinking back as we got ready for this webinar, I think my first visit on a cocoa farm was with Olam in Indonesia, Olam as it was called then, 16 years ago. So it's been a pretty decent long journey working with OFI over the years.
Great, thank you. So listening, as you have been, to what's been laid out by Rule and Christopher and Bertute, what are your responses? And you're not allowed, Alistair, just to say it's all brilliant, well done. It's good stuff. We all know that. That's why we're here. What are your thoughts on where this could lead, and perhaps what else could be included, as if they didn't have enough work to do already?
They just get to the start line, and then we move the goalposts a bit further. No, overall, very positive. I've always felt OFI were committed to sustainability. I've always felt they've seen it, like Mars does, as both the right thing to do and good business. We've tried to push on both fronts over the years as an organization. We see it the same way. We've got this firm belief. For us, we're a family-owned business, and we do this because we want to, and we think it's the right thing to do, but we also believe firmly that sustainability leaders will be rewarded and laggards will see consequences over the years. And we're definitely playing our part in doing that for our suppliers. We're a customer of OFI. We're looking to award more business to the leaders on sustainability and less to the laggards. So no surprises that we've partnered closely with them over the years. A couple of really important signature ingredients for us where we've got partnerships that I'll touch on today: cocoa and almonds, two critical ingredients to Mars. Cocoa in particular, our largest source of greenhouse gas emissions across the whole of Mars Incorporated, just one ingredient within our snacking business. And we've worked closely to build a traceable cocoa supply chain with OFI, ensuring we don't source from recently deforested areas, and aligning all our data, all our GHG accounting systems with @Source, which is their program, linking it into our systems. So they've been a key part, along with other suppliers of ours, in helping us make a fast start on our decarbonisation journey with our largest source of emissions. So coming to Choices for Change, pretty excited. You know, you've said, is it enough? Where should they go further? I think, firstly, we, in general, we're looking to see leadership from suppliers in areas that are material to our business. And we're pretty happy with the overlap here. For us, our priorities, climate change, circularity, human rights, and poverty. And you can see a strong overlap there with the choices for change. Prosperous farmers, thriving communities, climate action, and the regenerative work we see as part of our climate program. So good overlap. Perhaps no surprise, we're an important customer to OFI and a customer that's putting our money where our mouth is. Getting into the specifics, we think when it comes to climate change, we call it net zero done right. You know, is a supplier or a peer or any company including all of their emissions? Are they marking progress with milestones, not just talking about 20-year horizons? Are they performing today? We have a phrase, decisions and action that's made today reverberates tomorrow. So yes, pleased to see 50% scope 1 and 2 reductions by 2030, 30% on scope 3. For ourselves, we've got a 50% for all scopes. So a little progressive there, but we like to be a leader in the sustainability space, but we're pretty sure that OFI will partner and help support us on that. They've been very, very good in that sense. One highlight, I think, to call out when it comes to livelihoods and poverty, pretty inspiring. There's not many companies that have set out with an ambition on living income, a clean ambition on living income. You could say, is 200,000 farmers enough? We talked about this in the run-up to the webinar, Roel and I. Roel talked about 1 million farmers, which are 40% of their footprint, and aiming to get 200,000 to a living income. You can look at that both ways. I think it's realistic. This is one of the hardest impact areas I think companies face, tackling poverty. So to say that within 6 years from making an ambition, you're going to get 200,000 farmers there, I think is a meaningful start. And I think the value might be not in the fact that that's 1/5 of the million that will be worked with. The value will be in the learnings and the rich experience that will be built ready for scale after 2030. So, you know, perhaps some expectation for us for scale after 2030, but let's get going is more important than anything. And then I guess the final message, which is one where perhaps we'll look to see what happens, is it's really important we see co-investment from the big agriculture companies like OFI, not just passing on costs to the brands, expecting the brands to pay more. You know, ultimately, in the end, both of our businesses are dependent on farmers being successful, farmers being more profitable, more productive, allowing them to attract premium prices for their products. And we both win if that happens for farmers. So let's both invest in supporting getting them there. It's all sort of, we have a phrase at Mars that it's all about performance over promises. You know, a lot of companies get celebrated for the promises they make. And in fact, you can actually be growing your carbon footprint and be called out as a this or gold that or ranked top 5 the other company. And we think in the end, the promises don't mean anything unless they're backed by performance. We've got to walk the talk. A ton of carbon emissions reduced today is worth 10 tons reduced in 10 years' time. So this is about what happens now. And we'd love it if all those ratings, rankings would simply focus on performance. What can we do? We can basically make that how we work with our suppliers. We'll measure our suppliers on performance and play our role in driving change that way.
And how do you see those incentives evolving, Alistair, from a Mars point of view? You know, the classic problem, you know, many years ago was the sort of brands would kick it down the supply chain and not pay any more. I mean, that's changed a lot, and you've made some really interesting remarks around that. But going forward, you know, to 2030 and beyond, if you had a crystal ball and you were in charge, how would you see the evolution of that from a brand point of view taking hold further? What more could you do? I mean, preferential, you know, treatment of suppliers is one thing, but what else?
Yeah, I think it's look, it's about partnership. Roel said that at the start in his tee up, but you've also got to invest. In one of the little snippets he had of 3 of his customers, I think it was Aldi, Mars, and Walmart. You know, we're putting $1 billion into this, so we're investing. We're not simply raising expectations of suppliers and asking them to deliver carbon neutral cocoa from farmers that have had their incomes tripled with 0 deforestation. And by the way, we'd like it for lower cost. We understand this is an investment. but it's also a partnership, and you can't flip it the other way. Suppliers shouldn't just see sustainability as a new product line in their portfolio. Great, I can now sell not just cocoa and nuts, but I can sell the sustainability services that go with it as well. So we're looking for partnership, real deep partnership. And I think to do that, companies have to integrate sustainability into their business in the way that it's not a bolt-on. The truth is, we can get a fast start with the sort of bolt-on approach. Probably, if you just put a standalone sustainability team, that team will probably be able to get you close to 2030 on most of the commitments that companies have made. But we won't be getting to zero, and we won't be getting beyond 200,000 farmers to the million that OFI have said they're working for in their prosperous farmers pillar. I think we've got to fully integrate it. It's got to be in the purpose. It's got to be in the business strategy. We've seen it in the purpose that Rolls presented. It's got to be deeply in the business strategy. We put it in our internal leadership incentives. So a significant chunk of our long-term incentive for our top senior leaders is non-financial in nature. The circularity of our packs and our greenhouse gas reductions, our leaders get paid to do that through their long-term incentive program. We're integrating it into business processes, our internal business planning processes. You see growth and margin and greenhouse gas reductions all next to each other in the 5-year business planning cycle of our business. All our governance is fully integrated. You don't get to stand up as a P&L owner in Mars and report to the board just on your financials. You have to talk about carbon as well, livelihoods, circularity. And so that's our internal. We then cascade that through to our suppliers. So all the systems we have that value their performance are not on just traditional procurement metrics. We're adding in, as the team at OFI know, we're adding in a lot more. Trying to keep it as simple as we can and aim for those critical lagging indicators. But yeah, that's how we value our business. And we've integrated, we have a Mars signature sourcing methodology, MSSM, which puts a lot on our buyers' shoulders, but they have to integrate sustainability into the partnerships with suppliers, absolutely. And I think, go ahead, Toby. Yeah, I was going to go to partnerships, but go ahead.
No, go. I was just about to ask about that, so go ahead. Tell us more.
Yeah, I think then it sort of comes back to the importance of partnership, real partnership. It's taken us a while to work out. We often talk about uncommon collaborations at Mars. At the end of the day, if a significant part of your emissions are in your extended supply chain, I think Rolls said it was 90% for OFI. For us, it used to be higher. We've got it down to 70% by a lot of the work we've done in our extended supply chain. Then you've got a partner, and suppliers are probably, for a company like ours, the most critical partnership. We need a very broad range, but with that level of impact in the supply chain, it's critical. I think we've probably got the solutions to get to minus 50% emissions reductions by 2030. They exist. We know how to do them. Last year, Mars, we made a net zero roadmap to minus 50% by 2030, and we kind of surprised ourselves. We mapped all the activities and realized that even if you leave the super hard ones out, and you take the moderately hard and the maybe easier activities, we can get to minus 50%. There's a path there. So let's partner and get on with doing that and show our suppliers that if they do that, they'll grow their business with us. The second kind of partnership is different and interesting, which is what about the solutions we'll need on January the 1st, 2031 to get to zero, the technologies that we don't have in hand today. And that's exciting to see suppliers investing in those areas too. I think, we've got a number of partnerships here with OFI. There's a good one with Jeff, who's speaking. They're leading some work with USAID, a number of our peers in Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana on climate smart agricultural practices. But maybe a fun one that you hear less of from Mars that talks about what I've just been saying is in almonds. We've been thinking about how do we grow almonds in a more regenerative manner. Some of the technologies exist, but some of them don't. As I was saying, some of them are straightforward regenerative agriculture techniques, cover crops, etc. But some things haven't been proven before. Off-ground harvesting. Normally when you harvest almonds, you shake the tree, let the almonds hit the ground, sweep them up. There's huge dust clouds. It's not good for the soil. So we're working on what if you shake that tree and catch those almonds before they hit the ground and harvest them that way. Those are new technologies. You need to work on the business case for the farmer, how to do it well, making sure you're managing unintended consequences. And, OFI is the kind of company, when we shared the desire to work on almonds, they jumped at it. the Kind Almond Acres Initiative was born. And, we're working with OFI on 500 acres in California in this case. So, I think that's just a good example of both working on the things we know how to do now. Let's get on with it, reward suppliers for deploying those programs. And then on the new technology, partner and help our suppliers get through the innovation phases until we've proven something ready for scale. I don't know when you want to jump to it, but we've got a video that brings that to life on the ground, not just about me talking from a corporate perspective, but when you're all about performance rather than promises, we can hear from some farmers on the ground in California with that video.
Let's move to that. And if you had said to me 5 years ago, let's show a corporate video on something like this, I would have said absolutely no way. And it's testament to how things have moved on that I think this is really quite interesting. And the fact that a corporate video can actually be interesting it really does show us just how much things have moved. So let's have a look at this and kind of bring it to life. Thank you.
At Kind, we make incredibly tasty snacks, but we don't make the almonds themselves. That's Zach's job.
Technically, we don't make almonds either. We grow them.
Oh, right. We want to find out if there are any ways we can make almond farming more sustainable. So we recently launched the Kind Almond Acres Initiative. It's a 3-year partnership between Kind and OFI. We're combining some new technologies with best practices from regenerative agriculture, or Regen Ag, as the kids are calling it.
Are they?
Yup.
Regenerative agriculture is all about combining new and old farming techniques to help build soil health, biodiversity, and water resilience.
For example, between rows of almond trees, there's typically just dirt. So we're helping farmers plant a variety of cover crops in these rows to see if we can improve the health of the soil, use less water, and attract pollinators, giving them a little appetizer before the main course, the almighty almond tree. We're also experimenting with organic materials such as compost and biochar, which looks like charcoal, but it's way cooler because it could help trap and store carbon in the ground for generations. 3 chars for biochar. Am I right?
Nope.
Okay. Next, we're getting into whole orchard recycling, also known as WAR.
We pluck the trees at the end of their life cycle. We reincorporate them into the soil.
And they'll be there to see the next generations grow and share their stories of what life was like before the war.
Don't do that.
I hear ya. Alongside these regenerative practices, we're also doing tests in subsurface irrigation and off-ground harvesting because we are determined to make almond farming better for our growers, better for you, and better for our world.
Is it okay that I ate this?
Go for it. So let's do the Kind thing. It's gonna be nuts.
Nope.
Come on, Zach, I had to. It was right there.
Thanks, Alistair. That was pretty good. We can have some questions about this, and I noticed one of the top questions, which will be perhaps for you and for Christopher Stewart in the Q&A session, is the inevitable question we always have to answer, which is, what is your definition of Regen Ag? And that's in there in the Q&A. No escaping that one in every conversation. But before we do that, let's turn over to hear from Jeff Cohen, who is joining us, I think, from Indonesia, or is the mission director for Indonesia for USAID. So Jeff, welcome. Thanks for joining us. What are you doing here today, Jeff? What do you want to tell our audience?
Thanks. So I actually have a slide deck that I'm going to go through. Can you hear me? Just double checking.
Yep, not bad. Go ahead.
All right. So good morning, afternoon, evening to all of you. Yes, I'm in Jakarta, and I'm here to talk about partnerships for sustainability, which is clearly the theme of the day. And first and foremost, I want to thank my friends at OFI Indonesia, specifically Ravi and Imam, who invited me to join you today. Next slide, please. Just a little bit about myself. I'm from Detroit, which, if you know anything about Detroit, it's a city that hit rock bottom and is coming back. It's a picture of resilience after a fall. And I think it's very important to understand that it's not just an agricultural sector that you got to look for sustainability and regeneration. Those are the universities I went through. But the most important part of this slide is where I learned about international development was at the base of that beautiful mountain, and where I learned how important shifts in climate are to farmers. I worked in Bolivia at the base of Illimani. Well, the base was at 11,000 feet in a valley. But nonetheless, I worked with farmers and families that were trying to eke a living out of potatoes and corn and other things in a place that's extremely vulnerable to climate change. So I learned firsthand some of the struggles that farmers across the world are experiencing. Next slide. So after that, I was in the Peace Corps at the time, and I left the Peace Corps in Bolivia, joined the Peace Corps in Honduras, and then eventually joined USAID just about 20 years ago. For those who don't know, the United States Agency for International Development is like the first conglomeration of U.S. foreign assistance work together in one place. In 1961, President Kennedy signed the act. And our purpose is to build the capacity of partner countries to achieve their own development goals. And we do so currently in 80 countries around the world. In Indonesia, we support programs that are focused on local governance, preventing corruption, protecting the climate and the environment, promoting sustainable growth, strengthening higher education, and of course, supporting Indonesia's health sector. Next slide, please. Today, USAID plays a crucial role in promoting positive change, and I really like the terms that are being thrown around today by OFI and Mars: choices for change, performance rather than promises. I think these are right up where USAID is looking to engage. In our view of embracing change, we're focused on adaptive programming, innovation technology, of course, partnerships, another a term that has been floated around quite a bit tonight, evidence-based decision-making, and local ownership and sustainability, which sustainability really ties the room together. And adaptive programming, we focus on making sure that as the environment changes around us, we're adapting what we're working on, how we're working on it, how we engage with the communities and our partners. Of course, innovation and technology, we're looking for the next big things that we can collectively invest in with our partners. And partnerships, we want different types of partners with different types of actors, whether it's government, academia, or the private sector. There's always new ways to learn from others and to share resources and experience to move things forward. You can't do so without clear evidence and science-based decisions. And then with USAID and under Samantha Power, we're increasingly more focused on building that capacity at the local level, but also letting the local level lead the development outcomes that we're trying to achieve. We're not preaching, we're supporting, we're partnering and working together with local organizations and local communities. Next slide, please. In 2022, USAID came out with a new climate strategy with a commitment to support 500 million people to adapt to the negative impacts of climate change and prepare for the future. And I want to hold us to the same thing Mars holds its customer or its suppliers to, performance rather than promises. And to do so, we're working in all different areas of climate change mitigation and adaptation around the globe, whether it's in agriculture or solid waste management, water and sanitation, or ocean plastics. We're involved in a lot of different things around the world. And as we all know, climate change is already here. We're not waiting for it to happen. We're experiencing it. In Indonesia with OFI, we're focused on a project called Laskar Cocoa, which is working on coffee and cocoa, focused on 5,500 cocoa farmers and 1,000 coffee farmers that were working together to train on sustainability or sustainable agroforestry practices and improve the management of 15,000 hectares of watershed and buffer vegetation surrounding both cocoa and coffee farms, with the end goal to sequester 250,000 tons of carbon. Now, when you look at the big long-term or the strategy that was outlined by the team from OFI, we're a very small piece of that. But if you think about it, what we're doing in Indonesia is a small piece of it, but it takes intensive effort and a lot of resources to get that work done. We also have another partnership that Alistair mentioned with Mars, and we've been working with Mars in Indonesia and across the world for a long time as well. I just traveled to the field with Frank Mars recently to look at areas where we can expand to do more work in buffer zones of national parks. And we're also engaging with OFI to expand to new areas because there's a lot more that needs to be done in a place like Indonesia with extensive forests that are under threat. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Oh, here we go. Sustainable landscapes. So here you have a forest that was a thriving ecosystem that was deforested and is now challenged. deforestation, unsustainable land management, and land degradation lead to losses in biodiversity, affect water resources, and represent nearly a quarter of global greenhouse gas emissions. Poor land management has a negative impact on agricultural production, damaging the livelihoods of farmers as well as the bottom line for businesses like OFI and Mars that rely on sustainably sourced agricultural commodities for the customers that are out there demanding it. And to me, it's really important. Sustainability from a USAID perspective means sustainable beyond our funding, sustainable beyond the effort of a donor country like the United States and Indonesia. And that's where the private sector and the market really are the most important pieces. The local government can also scale things up, but it really is the off-takers and the market that's going to lead to something generating these livelihoods for the farmers at the farm level. Improving land use management also reduces greenhouse gas emissions and increases carbon storage, whether it's through biochar. I was just visiting earlier today a project that's working on bamboo and how you can cut bamboo and use it for flooring and desk production, but then you can use the waste as biochar to really create a circular economy. And I think there's lots of lessons learned across all agricultural commodities where you can do things in a more circular way and still improve livelihoods for those who depend on the forests, the coastlines, watersheds, etc., for their own productivity. And here in Indonesia, we're extremely focused on biodiversity conservation, especially in the marine space, an area where I know Mars is active in their coral reef restoration and also in the landscape space. Currently, USAID across the world is working with more than 24 countries to focus on forest and landscape improved management. USAID works with local governments to improve policies so that they can be better stewards of their own local environment, and then at the national level to ensure that regulations are aligned with productivity, but sustainable productivity to increase overall economic growth in a way that can be continuous and circular. In Indonesia, recently or last year, we committed a new $50 million partnership with the Ministry of Environment and Forestry that's focused on forest and other land use. And we have a large commitment in the marine space for both sustainable fishing and coral conservation. We also have an additional $40 million that work with things like what we're talking about today on cocoa, coffee, sustainability, and farmer engagement. Next slide, please. Next slide. As was mentioned previously, you're not getting a full picture if you're not working with women who are extremely important to all agriculture productivity and not just agriculture, as was stated earlier. We recognize that including women in our sustainable landscapes work and our biodiversity conservation and our natural resource management will lead to more sustainable resource use, reduce conflict, and increase equitable benefits for all, as women play important roles in the value chain. We also need to be more inclusive of our indigenous populations to make sure that we're not just managing land better, but we're managing land rights better. Next slide, please. I think the most important part today, here's me in various batiks of various colors, but with three of our partners, whether it's OFI or Mars, as you see in the top pictures, or AWS, which is focused on IT-related upskilling. USAID sees the private sector as really one of our more important partnerships that we foster across the world. And the more we can do in collaboration, sharing skills, resources, access to markets, access to government officials, I think the better off we'll be. Next slide. Samantha Power is focused on increasing our resources that go to local communities, local organizations, local governments, and are led by local people who design and share information with us so that we can implement projects that meet their needs most specifically. And we'll continue to do that for years to come. We're really increasing our resources flowing to local organizations, and that requires a lot of capacity building from USAID offices around the world. Last slide, please. So this is me and the government of Indonesia officials, Pak Imam from OFI in Bajawa, which is an area where we're working on with women cooperatives who are producing coffee in a sustainable way, upskilling them, and they'll be part of the 5,500 farmers that we're working with here in 1,000 in coffee and 5,500 in cacao. Anyway, thank you very much. I'm happy to take a question or two. I know we're short on time though. Over.
Thanks very much, Jeff. Really interesting overview. And the more eagle-eyed listeners would have noticed that Jeff has a Big Lebowski shot behind him on his desk and managed to drop in a Big Lebowski reference into his remarks. So congratulations, Jeff. Smoothly done. And thank you so much for that overview of the work that you've been doing with OFI and other companies. Really interesting to hear how that's evolving. So let's turn to our Q&A session now. We have a little bit of time for that. So let's see what questions we've got. Now, it's quite interesting to see how effective the OFI team have been in answering 12 of the questions already in the chat function, including the ever-present one about what's your definition of regen ag. Thank you for that, Christopher. Multiple times that has been answered. And I think it's relief to all of us to see very much in line with most other large companies' definitions, i.e. they're as a set of evolving principles to have performance measured against. So I won't go into the definition of regen ag, but a really interesting question here from Marlene New. She says, I like Stephanie's comment not to leave the poorer farmers behind in your goals. Does OFI have targets for each farmer segment? That's a complex question. Christopher, shall I come to you first on that one? I think you're still on.
I didn't catch the question, sorry.
So does OFI have targets for each farmer segment on the point about not leaving poorer farmers behind in your goals? I suppose the question I was asking, have you sort of segmented poverty levels and looked at it that way?
Well, this is a great question, and we absolutely have been working on farmer segmentation, because understanding the different sort of socioeconomic groups within a farmer population allows you to really tailor your response to them. So at the overall level, we haven't made targets for individual segments, because it really depends on the farming community. But we have pioneered a segmentation tool internally and trained our teams in different countries to use that tool and ask questions about the farmer population that they are sourcing from and servicing. And that's actually, for instance, in Ghana, we did a whole exercise with the Ghanaian team on cashew, and that allowed them really to ask the questions about who is benefiting from program support and tailor our interventions to those segments. So that's something that we're quite keen on building up, because really, we work, for instance, on coffee in Uganda. If you provide a one-size-fits-all tool to all the farmers, a lot of that effort is wasted. So, for instance, if the farmer is not properly pruning their crop, and you provide them with fertilizer inputs, the plants just can't take that up. So you have to start off with understanding who the farmers are and what their practices are, and then you can say, well, actually, we're going to take you through a stepwise program to help you improve your yield, your quality, and your return on investment. So that's really how we do it. We're looking at using and scaling up our segmentation approach to be as efficient as we possibly can in delivering our programs and having the best possible impact on their livelihoods. I'll stop there.
Thanks very much. Any other panelists like to add anything on that? Stephanie, any views on to take that one further? You don't have to, but if you wanted to add anything, you're very welcome.
I would only add that that data does show, and I think some of the OFI data as well, that some of the smaller farmers, say young people who've just gotten some land from their families, that kind of thing, can be some of the more entrepreneurial, innovative people. So I think that we, again, we don't want to use this living income quantitative target as a way to exclude people, but rather a way for us to ask, does it all add up? At the end of the day, will farmers be profitable? Do they have the enabling conditions to thrive? So, and I think also segmentation is very helpful, can be, as long as, again, it doesn't constrict the teams to offering services to all farmers, because you really want to be able to offer services that most people can opt into, and regardless of their assets.
Thank you. Anybody else want to add anything on that point before we move on?
Yeah, I'd like to add 2 points, Stephanie, that you made earlier as well, about us not focusing on the large-holder farmers and the smallholder farmers. I'd like to be very specific. For instance, our Cocoa Compass strategy says that by 2030, we want to have 150,000 out of the 200,000 elevated into a living income. So the vast majority of our target will need to be delivered by our cocoa business. And that's also highlighted in that specific strategy. That automatically takes into account that we have to collaborate with smallholder farmers, as the majority of where we're sourcing from is smallholder farmer based. So I think the underlying issue that I do want to highlight here is that one should not work in those supply chains where things are already going well. We're talking about positive change. So it's also about really involving yourselves in supply chains where there are significant issues and trying to bring about change in those already harder conditions. You should not, the worst thing we can do as an industry is walk away from supply chains with severe challenges. And I do want to highlight that that's what you should not close your eyes for.
Could I add something? In Indonesia, one of the interesting things about cacao, about cocoa here in Indonesia, is that it used to be an extremely productive place. And it hasn't been lately. And so there's a lot of old cocoa that can be regenerated that just requires a bit of grafting and some TLC by farmers. But it's not just the farmers that need to be created. And here both Mars and OFI are working at the farmer training programs. Those folks that can be entrepreneurial and do things like set up seed banks and do the pruning or do the composting. Mars calls them cocoa doctors, and OFI has another term of art for them. But there are entrepreneurial folks that can make living wages or become extremely, profitable in their efforts as you roll out programs that address farmer needs, further down the chain.
Thank you. Well, lots of great questions here. Bertie, there was a question here about labour conditions and the hazelnut supply chain. I just wanted to give you the chance to offer a little bit more on that and how that your current work leads into the work you will be doing in the plan. So if there's anything else you wanted to say on that, perhaps let's go through that now.
Thank you so much, Toby. Yes, as I said, seasonal migrant workers are the key actors in the hazelnut supply chain in Turkey. So under our Safeguarding Children's and Human Rights pillar, we are focusing on all the aspects of labor. So it's not only, I focused on women, but we're looking at it holistically on empowering seasonal migrant workers. So the families, both men, women, and their children as well. So one of the important things that we see is that the working conditions and working processes, we have seen that workers does not have access to their rights. They don't know how much money are they going to receive after they do the work. When are they going to receive their salaries? Is there a written agreement between the employees of the employees? So it is very important for us to work together with the migrant workers, train them on their fundamental human rights so that they're aware of, at the end of the work, how much money they are going to receive. So OFI was the first company in Turkey who has established agricultural seasonal contracts. So now in the hazelnut supply chain, seasonal migrant workers are having a chance to sign a written contract. And it says, how many days are they going to work? What are the conditions? If something happens, like occupational health and safety, an accident can happen on the farm. And it's very hot in Turkey, so they're working under, 40 degrees of sun. And if something happens, who's going to take them to the hospital? So access to healthcare, transportation, where are they going to stay? So these are all written in the contracts. So it's not verbal, it is written, and both sides are protected. It's not only always the worker, but also the farmer is getting protected as well because of the contracts, and everyone is knowing where their rights are. So we're now trying to scale up those programs so that not only the hazelnut farmers are using those contracts, but other commodities in Turkey as well. So, you know, farmers working in raisins, farmers working in fig industry. So scaling up the impact through other commodities and products are also important. And I think there was a question on child labor, but I have talked about child labor monitoring and remediation system a lot. But I think what is important is, and there was a question on the digitalization. So this is very important for us to use digital tools on the farm. We have teams on the ground who are using tablets when they're on the ground, and they're capturing the data, the primary data on the farm level. And while I was talking about the CLMRS, you know, about profiling, community profiling, household profiling, everything is captured in the digital tool that we have. We have a system called OFI Farmer Information System, and it's an application that our field teams can have access, and they capture the data there. So for us, it is very easy to track. Okay, I went to farmer A, and farmer A has the risk of, you know, like there are 3 children that might be under that risk. And 7 days later, did I do a remediation action? If I did, can I do the, you know, like an announced visit? And someone does the visit and they've made a note on the app. So another team member can also see the note and act accordingly. So I think it is very important for us to get advantage of the digital tools that we have, so that it also adds on to the impact we create on the ground.
Thank you. I was going to ask Roel as well to comment on this point, because Roel, you know, you have some experience recently working with an organisation to try and standardise some of these outputs, and given the comments that Alistair was making around how you collaborate with companies like Mars, what have you learned? What comments would you make around this question we have in the chat about tracking, monitoring, reporting, and any comments you might like to make building on Virtues just now?
Well, I think I just like to reiterate what I've mentioned before when I was presenting a strategy. For us, and for me as well, collaboration is key. It doesn't make sense if you don't align amongst multiple industry partners, and that can be peers and competing companies, but also your customers or your suppliers, around the language of sustainability. For me, it makes a lot of sense to speak a common language when you talk about living income, to speak a common language when you talk about a carbon footprint. And I do think, and that's also what is now the startup company that we are a co-founder of, called Tract, is trying to actually do that for the industry. They're at the early stages, but the promise is the development is very good. What is really encouraging, what encouraged me a lot in working there, and also Christopher and Burju have collaborated, is the willingness of the industry to actually work together and get that common language of how you measure carbon footprint, or what you mean with regen ag, or and how you then will measure it. So I do think there's a massive willingness. And we've played a leading role in trying to convene, but we're also very humble in the sense that it takes a lot of people and a lot of time actually as well to move in the right direction. For me, you as an individual company should not sit on specific measurement methodology yourself. It needs to make sure you're creating a language that many people can speak, so you can drive efficiency, so all of us can focus on what needs to be focused. And that's actually driving the numbers in the right direction, instead of figuring out how you should calculate those numbers. So for us, I think as OFI, we fully agree with that. And Christoph was alluding to that fact as well. We developed a living income calculator tool and methodology, and we're looking right now for ways to make that a tool that can be commonly used as well. So these are things that we think are crucial to share that, and to make sure that the industry speaks that common language.
Thank you. Alistair, I imagine you'd be in complete agreement at that. Anything you want to add on that point? Has it all been said?
Yeah, I mean, one of our experiences here is one of the best ways to get the numbers to move in the right direction is to work on the numbers. You know, you often find that granularity itself is one of the best strategies to really understand your impacts, but you're often rewarded. If you take a generic Ghana cocoa impact factor, you're sort of burdened with the average. Whereas if you're working with decent suppliers who are doing better than average work when compared to the rest of the industry, as soon as you get going on data and get it down to farm level, supplier level, origin level, or even farm level, you get rewarded with a better carbon impact factor for that batch of cocoa from that farm. So there's a huge motivation to work on data. At the same time, I think it's so in its infancy. You know, every time I look at our systems and think, oh my gosh, we are so immature on our journey on sustainability data, we look up, phone some outside service providers and realize that actually the rest of the industry is not in a very good place either. And we've had to invent many of our own data systems in the sustainability space. There's some that we use outside, but many of them we've developed. So I think that generally this is an area we all need to invest in, and we need to do it in a manner which doesn't create work for the next organization down the chain. And so there's no point Mars making our world efficient on data, and then all of our suppliers have got to do different surveys for different customers on different KPIs, and they're rewarded differently. You know, the alignment of all of that is critical. I personally think we should get away from all the many activity indicators and just get into the bottom line performance lagging indicators. How much have you decarbonized? How many farmers are at living income? You know, you don't need many to know if a supplier is doing a great job. So let's work on it, let's simplify it, and let's align it all would be my messages.
And I'd like to that's also why we really trimmed it down to nine largely numerical targets. And obviously that doesn't not take into account the importance of water, for instance, in an almond supply chain or in an onion supply chain. But what we've said is basically across our businesses, these are related to the most material impact areas, and that's where we want to really achieve that impact. So we forced ourselves, Alistair, to focus.
Thank you. Here's an interesting one that's coming up more and more around regen. Christopher, let me put this to you initially. Nutritional content and regen, kind of a holy grail, isn't it? If that works, there's an awful lot of benefits out there. In your experience, Christopher, any emerging link here? I think we all want the answer to be yes, but you're a man of science, I believe, amongst other things. So what are your thoughts on that so far, Christopher?
Yeah, thank you, Toby. I think there's a lot of research going on, but it's not yet conclusive. And we've had 20 years or more of research on organic foods to see whether organic foods are richer in nutrients and minerals and so forth. I don't think that's necessarily conclusive, but I do think that customers and consumers really do want more and more to understand where their food is from and how it's produced. And all of this sort of insistence and focus on more data is going to create a lot more transparency. And hopefully, I mean, we really hope that consumers will demand regenerative agriculture, not because we tell them that it's a good thing, but because of all of the benefits that come to the farmer and to nature in producing it that way. And obviously, there are some aspects, for instance, in terms of pesticide residue levels, where that's a huge concern from a regulatory standpoint and a consumer standpoint. And of course, Regen Ag can do a great deal to reduce the reliance on pesticides and herbicides, particularly because obviously healthy plants that are grown in a Regen Ag system are actually more robust and more resistant to pests and diseases, and therefore they don't really need to be drenched in various chemicals. So that's really a positive thing, and I think that we will see more and more people looking to Regen Ag to provide good healthy food.
Thanks. And a slight variation on that theme, one for you, Stephanie. In your experience of Regen Ag, is it helping farmers earn more money in terms of input costs and output gains? Any link with your work around living income, Stephanie, that you've seen so far?
Yeah, I think we cannot separate the two, actually. I think that's why I really like the commitments are shown as a package, because the transition to regenerative farming has to work out, whether in the short or medium long term financially for farmers, for them to continue to adopt those practices and maintain that system. Does it make more money? I think there are certain practices which are low-hanging fruit. Christopher, you mentioned pruning, for example, in tree crops. That is, of course, takes labor, machinery, everything. There is a cost, but there is, you know, an immediate benefit. Other practices like a replacement of varieties, say, or integrating cover crops in the almond farm where you may need different machinery, does take a, you know, transition time. So I think that the questions we're getting in the audience, especially around the costs of regenerative farming, are really relevant. And I would say this is also a prime area for partnership with banks, with folks like USAID, others, so that we can think about, for a whole crop sector, what's the cost and the solutions of that transition.
Thank you.
If I may add just
Jeff, go ahead.
A bit off base, but I realize that, of course, we're looking for the niche markets where you can, you know, add profitability to organically produced and sustainable product. But there's also something to be said about companies that take a little bit of a hit in order to produce a product that's produced in a better way. And I'll give you a small example here. We have a company we work with that produces bricks with recycled material as part of the material that's used to make the brick. And when this woman who runs this, you know, Rebrick, it's called, company, was asked, well, do you expect somebody's going to pay a premium for your brick because it's produced with, you know, the lowest quality plastic? And she said, absolutely not. I don't expect anybody to buy my brick at a different price point than the bricks I sell right next to it. What I'm offering is a product that's more sustainably made, that's doing something about the plastic that's polluting the environment. And so she created a product that's different at the same price point, at the same quality. And it costs her more because she's buying this plastic and adding it to the bricks and capturing it in a brick for 50 years or however long the brick lasts. And, you know, so I think, of course, you have to be profitable, but there has to be a balance between profitability and also doing the right thing. And that's, for us, for USA, we're looking to partner with companies that are trying to do the right thing. And we think eventually that becomes more profitable.
Thank you, Jeff. Well, we're almost out of time, so I'm going to turn over to Rule for some concluding comments. Rule, actually, there was a note here you might want to build into a closing comment. Somebody said, just what does 1 million farmers mean for OFI in terms of a global business? What's the sort of context with the number of farmers you're working on? So any comment you might have to make on that, and just sort of what numbers we're talking about now and later, and then perhaps any closing comments you have for the audience. I had asked you, I think, to say what you want the audience to take away, what you want them to remember from the last 90 minutes or so. So, Rule, over to you before we close.
Yeah, just on the 1 million farmers, as I mentioned before, we deal with 2.4 million farmers globally. So 1 million of those is around about 40%. That we want to have receiving enhanced livelihood support by 2030. You can always talk about big numbers, Toby, but for me, it's actually one farmer at a time, right? It's about the individual farmer, and it's in the individual supply chain and their in the individual challenges. And what Burju and also, I believe also Alistair, Jeff, and Stephanie and Christopher have highlighted is that supply chains are very specific. You need to understand the specific issues that are going on within, or specific risks within supply chains, and you need to be present at the start, at the beginning, where the risks are the highest, to be able to generate that impact. I think the two key messages I'd like to land here is that we are coming out with a strategy. We are making commitments to what we want to achieve in 2030 as a company, which is a bold statement. And it also obliges us to indeed put performance over promise, which is something that we generally like to do. But the other message is we cannot do this without clear, open, transparent collaboration and partnership across the industry. And by sitting together in a diverse panel that I'm very grateful of, Jeff, Alistair, Stephanie, thank you very much for joining us today. We hope to highlight that for us, collaboration and partnerships are really key to drive that impact at scale. And we're at the start of a journey. We're super excited to really push it forward. There is a sense of urgency that we see, and we saw many questions also relating to current challenges going on in some supply chains. So we realize that as well. And we're optimistic that we can move the needle in the right direction. And we thank those on the call as well in advance for joining us on the journey and collaborating with us. So that's my closing message. Thank you very much, and let's hope we can move it all in the right direction.
Well, thank you very much. This certainly seems like a significant step in that direction. So congratulations, Royal and team. Thanks so much to all of our speakers for an excellent last 90 minutes, and to you, the audience, for being a wonderful crowd with some great questions. We answered 17 of them live, which is, I think, a record. Well done, Team OFI. We will attempt to summarize and send those out in some way, shape or form. And the recording will be with you on every credible podcast platform very soon, as it will on our YouTube channel, where you can also see our recent documentary about regenerative cotton and how that is working out for farmers in India. So thanks again to the team at OFI and colleagues. Thanks to you, the audience. You'll be hearing from us all very soon, and have a wonderful day. Thank you and goodbye.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.